This is Democracy Watch. Mark, Donald Trump just got some unexpected bad news in court when he tried to target some folks who he viewed as political opponents. Can you explain what just happened?
Yes, Donald Trump lost another lawsuit against a law firm that he had targeted with his unconstitutional executive orders. This is now the fourth federal judge, all different federal judges, that have not just said that what Donald Trump did in targeting law firms was a violation of the one constitutional provision. It is like, when you read the opinion, it is another one that is just like a cascading series of, yep, and Donald Trump's order violates that, and it violates this, and it violates that, and it violates this. And so another judge has essentially thrown the book at Donald Trump and the executive branch in some pretty extraordinary language in places over its effort to, act vengefully against law firms that, have in some ways, in his view, done him wrong.
And what was it that this law firm in particular did that he viewed as such an affront that he wanted to sign an executive order specifically targeting them? And this law firm is it Sussman Godfrey?
Yes. So Sussman Godfrey, is in a slightly different camp than the others. The first law firm, Perkins Coie, was targeted because I had worked there. Bob Mueller's former law firm was targeted. And so they have usually had some relationship to a person. Here, they targeted Sussman Godfrey, as far as we can tell, because they had represented the Dominion voting system, the company that had been libeled and defamed by Fox News, which, by the way, Fox News settled that case.
Right.
So, right.
Like not exactly a lot of ground to stand on that suggests that this was like some inappropriate lawsuit that they waged when Fox was willing to pay out $787 million as the result of it.
Right, but Donald Trump was obviously unhappy with that result, even though he was not a party. It runs against his big lie narrative, and so he targeted this law firm, and they didn't capitulate. Unlike some of the law firms that, like Paul Weiss, that bent a knee and bowed down and said, what can I do for you? Sussman Godfrey stood tall, along with the other law firms that did as well, and they fought, and now they have won.
And so with that said, is there a chance then that the Trump administration is going to appeal this case? Because this was ruled by a federal judge in Washington, D.C.
Right. So I don't think so. And you and I have talked this, we've now done a video with each time that there has been one of these court decisions. And each time, we talk about this, and the Trump administration has not appealed a single one of these cases. And here's why. Because they know that if they appeal and it goes to the Court of Appeals, it creates precedent, right? It becomes something that becomes binding, or at least within that circuit, if they go after other law firms. But they don't want precedent, and this is part of the fatal flaw of the court's decision in the injunctions case involving birthright citizenship. The justices of the Supreme Court seem to believe that the administration is acting on the up and up, so that if they get, a ruling against them, they will either appeal it up to the Supreme Court, and then there will be a nationwide precedent, or they will just cease doing the thing that violated the law. Of course, that's not what Donald Trump does, right? Donald Trump wants the freedom to be able to continue to go after, whether it's people by stripping them of their citizenship or going after other law firms. And so he's never going to appeal these cases because he does not want that precedent to exist.
Well, the other avenue, Mark, would be an instance where one of these judges can see that Donald Trump is continuously issuing these illegal, unlawful edicts, his executive orders targeting these individual law firms, which he keeps losing in court. And so you would think that the way to prevent that from happening is to issue some nationwide injunction. But because of the Supreme Court ruling that was handed down on Friday, isn't it true that now there's nothing barring Trump from continuing to target individual law firms? And yeah, he'll lose in court, but he's not going to appeal them, so there won't be any precedent. There's an inability now to issue nationwide injunctions, so there's nothing stopping him from targeting other law firms. And so in this case, hasn't he kind of helped himself by virtue of the Supreme Court ruling against nationwide injunctions this past Friday?
Absolutely, because, as you say, he can prevent there from being precedent by not appealing these losses. But then he can but because there's no broader injunction, he can go and continue to target more law firms, more universities, more media companies. Like pick your industry, right? He
Yeah.
continued to do that. And, what we'll see is that some of these institutions will bend a knee, right? They're not all going to stand up the way that Sussman Godfrey did. Some of them are going to settle like Paul Weiss. Some of them may even preemptively settle just at the threat of litigation, which, remember, we saw 8 other law firms do. Yeah. We saw 8 law firms that never even got executive orders, just proactively went into the Oval Office to cut deals. Yeah. And so, this is why it just feels every day that even though we win these fights, and kudos to the lawyers for Sussman Godfrey and to the partners there for standing up, we win these fights, but if the courts don't come to recognize that Donald Trump doesn't play by the normal rules of any other administration and that he wants to use the court system and abuse it to intimidate his enemies, this is going to be a very, very long 4 years. Now, I will give credit to this judge because in his opinion, he not just had choice words in the opinion, but if you read his court order, which accompanies the opinion, it is 5 pages long, which, by the way, is a very long court order. I mean, normally a court order in a case like this would say, for the reasons cited in my memorandum, it is ordered that the executive order of Donald Trump is hereby enjoined. And that would be the end. It might take up a page, might take up a couple of pages. People oftentimes see these on social media. They're posted side by side. They're relatively short and they have the judge's signature. This order is 5 pages long. This judge understands the games that Donald Trump plays. Among other things, it requires that that within 2 days, 2 business days of this order, the Trump administration has to file a status report describing the steps taken to ensure compliance with the order and certifying compliance with its requirements. Now, that's pretty extraordinary. Like, one would normally expect that if there is a court order blocking the Trump administration from doing something and requiring them to take corrective action, they could be trusted to do so. This judge obviously doesn't trust that the administration will do so, and is making them come back with a status report and certifying it. Presumably, some poor schmo is going to be, the one
have to put his law license on the line. Yeah, have to put his law license on the line in hopes that Donald Trump is going to comply with the courts, which is not a good bet. Not something you want to put your family's livelihood on.
Yeah, I mean, one of the provisions requires that Russell Voigt is directed to identify all government goods, property, materials, services provided for the benefit of Sussman Godfrey that were previously blocked in this order, and to immediately issue directions to the relevant heads of agencies and departments that they are to reverse any cessation of the provisions of such materials and goods. And then they have to provide those correspondence to the plaintiff's lawyers. Again, like saying, hey, you, Russ Voigt, have to do this thing. You then have to prove you did it. And, this goes on for, like I said, 5 pages. So at least this judge doesn't trust that the administration will otherwise do the right thing.
Well, you and I have spoken at length about this idea, the presumption of regularity, and this idea that because the federal government has acted in good faith for decades and decades and decades and has built up so much goodwill with the court system that generally they just, whatever they say, they could assume it's true, assume that it's accurate and factual. And they've been coasting off of those decades of all that goodwill that's been built up. But it seems like, whereas some judges are perfectly content to give them that deference because they just assume, okay, well, previous administrations have been honest, and so of course the Trump administration is going to be honest. It seems like there are other judges who get what the Trump administration is doing here and aren't going to confer to them that goodwill that has been built up through previous, years and years and administrations, because they can see that this administration, that the Trump White House, is just going to defy the law, abuse the court system, do whatever they can, traffic in overt illegality, and then just expect to get all of this deference in the court system.
Yeah. And, again, as we talked about with some of the prior orders, the tone of this opinion is not the kind of opinion you normally see judges write with respect to the something done by the government. I mean, the government usually gets, every benefit of the doubt and the like. Here's just some of what this judge wrote. Sussman has demonstrated that the order is unconstitutional from beginning to end. The court also said the order goes beyond violating the Constitution and the laws of the United States. The order threatens the independence of the bar, a necessity for the rule of law. Accordingly, the court concludes that the balance of equities in the public interest weigh overwhelmingly in favor of granting the permanent injunction. I mean, that
sounds like he's on the fence.
Yeah, right, exactly. That's very strong language from another judge. And I want to point out again, this is 4 different federal judges. 4 different, some appointed by Democrats, some appointed by Republicans. All of them have not just ruled against the Trump administration from start to finish, but all of them have expressed indignity and outrage at what it is that the government did here, that what Donald Trump did here was not just sort of a foot fault over the constitutional line. It was a stampede over the constitutional line. And it was an effort to show disrespect for the rule of law itself.
Mark, there have been so many lawsuits that the Trump administration and the DOJ have been engaged in. Does there come, and granted, many of them, are doomed lawsuits. Democracy Docket covered the Stanford study that showed that the DOJ is losing 96% of cases, which is kind of unprecedented, unheard of for the Department of Justice. And now, given the fact that we can't see nationwide injunctions, presumably there's going to be a boatload of cases, as it relates to birthright citizenship, for example. Every single individual instance of this is going to be challenged in court. So we may see thousands of birthright citizenship cases that the DOJ has to argue. Is there going to come a point where the DOJ runs out of resources, runs out of prosecutors to be able to argue these cases and litigate this stuff in court?
Yeah, we've already seen the Department of Justice plead with judges that they are understaffed. Now, part of the reason they're understaffed is because, of course, they purged the Department of Justice.
And the ones who aren't getting purged are resigning.
Correct. So they have already, in a number of these cases already, have gone to judges and said, poor us, we're overworked, we can't keep up with all these cases, and we need more time. And, this is the kind of thing that, the Department of Justice would usually get the benefit of the doubt, but we have seen judges increasingly say no. In some of the deportation cases, the Department of Justice asked for, a day or two, and you heard those judges say no. I mean, The fact that this judge in this case is requiring the Department of Justice to file a status report within 2 days. Within 2 days. I mean, he doesn't trust the Department of Justice to act appropriately for 2 days.
Right.
Just gives you some sense. So I think that the fact is the DOJ is digging itself a hole here. And I do think that the Supreme Court's unfortunate decision is going to mean that there's going to be a lot more litigation, and it's going to stretch the private bar. It's going to make it harder for these folks who have been wronged to find lawyers, because a lot of these big law firms that are cowards have backed away from representing people in these cases. And the nonprofit sector will be strained, but so too will the Department of Justice. And here's my message to the judges: don't give them an inch. Don't give them an hour. Don't give them a minute. Don't give them anything. They made this bed. They chose this course. And the government of all parties has no claim that they don't have the resources. They have an unlimited amount of resources for the things that Donald Trump cares about. If Donald Trump cares about something, he will steal the money from some other part of the government. He will violate some appropriation statute. So when they come in and say, well, we don't have the law, we don't have the resources to provide a quick relief or a quick hearing to people who are being deprived of liberty, people being deprived of due process, people being stripped of citizenship, tell them, go pound sand.
Perfectly put. Let's end with this. We have seen instances where universities have, it took long enough, but they've kind of realized that they're more protected if they can create some sort of NATO among the universities, knowing full well that Trump is going to attack them. Trump has also been attacking law firms since the very beginning of his administration. Is there some effort occurring behind the scenes where folks in different law firms are opening lines of communication, knowing full well that they're all going to be the target at some point by this administration, so that there can be a sense of collective action in an instance where the administration goes after one firm? It's going to be a hell of a lot harder if every firm is kind of joined in behind them.
Yeah, I'm sure there are those conversations. There have been discussion at those conversations. How far they've gotten or not gotten, I don't know. I think that we need to, though, distinguish between two different things. The first is that I think that the law firms that have been wrongly targeted should certainly be in alliance with one another. I think the law firms that have not been targeted should join that alliance and be supportive and join, as you say, kind of a collective NATO to prevent themselves and others from being targeted. What I have objected to, and objected to quite publicly, is the idea that we are going to treat the capitulating law firms, the collaborating law firms, as if somehow they are victims. You know, the American Bar Association filed a lawsuit to try to get actually a sort of nationwide universal injunction. We'll see where that case goes now on behalf of kind of all lawyers and all law firms. And I praised the lawsuit when it was filed, but I also offered the following criticism. They portray Paul Weiss as a victim. They portray the other law firms that capitulated as victims, that they were essentially, coerced into bending a knee. And the fact is, they are collaborators. Sure, Donald Trump threatened something, but it is the role of lawyers to stand up against that.
Right.
It is the role of large institutions to not bend a knee. And the ones that did need to be called out. And they should not be cut an inch of slack in this effort to protect each other. As far as I'm concerned, let Donald Trump turn Paul Weiss into a pro bono operation for the oil and gas industry, and I will not shed a tear. Okay? Like, I don't think that anyone should be coming to those law firms' aid. That's a bit of a controversial proposition and position that I have, but that's what I think.
No, I mean, it makes perfect sense. It would, maybe you can give them a little bit of slack if their whole job wasn't to defend from illegal actions being taken on behalf of, for example, the federal government. That's what they're doing right there. If anybody is in a position to be able to defend themselves against an abusive administration, it's the attorneys, and yet here we are. So with that said, I know that you have been a leader in terms of bringing this issue of these law firms who are fighting back and capitulating into the spotlight. So for everybody who's watching right now, to help elevate Mark's voice and his team's voice, please subscribe to his YouTube channel, Democracy Docket. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. It doesn't cost you anything to subscribe, but it will help elevate his voice, and that's especially urgently needed right now. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.